Hello and welcome to the Raw Rugby Podcast Rapid Fire Edition for round 15, the final round of Super Rugby Pacific. I am not Christy Doran, as you may hear. I am Nick Wasiliev, the producer and man behind the scenes, occasional person who jumps on the show here. And I am delighted to have Tony Harper by my side. Christy's off. He's in France, as we alluded to on the Tuesday podcast. He's currently sipping champagne and at a wedding.
What a time to go away, hey Nick. What about that? And if you want to talk about what's the absolute opposite of a rapid fire, it's the slow burn fire, which is what's just happened to the Rebels over the past several weeks or months, I suggest. We go into a massive weekend with finals footy on the line for 11 of the 12 franchises, completely overshadowed by news on this morning, which is Thursday afternoon. We're chatting now. That the Rebels will not operate as a Super Rugby team in 2025, not as long as Rugby Australia gets their way. They have turned their back on a private consortium that looked at a rescue plan for the club. They have said that there's a complete lack of transparency there, and won't be going ahead with it. The players were brought into the club this morning. The Raw got wind of this via Mark Drummond at about 9 a.m. And we were first up with that story. Then at 10 a.m. it emerged that the players had been brought into a room at Rebels headquarters addressed by Phil Waugh and Dan Herbert. At the same time that was happening, the consortium head, Lee Clifford, was receiving an email saying that the consortium bid was being rejected. The players, this was 10 a.m., the players had a check-in for a flight to Fiji at 11:45. So obviously there's been some thoughts around the timing there, which there's been press conferences today with Daniel Herbert and Phil Waugh in which they've attempted to address a lot of the questions. But what a time for this to happen right on the eve of, this decisive final round, Nick.
Absolutely. Before we actually dive into the final round and talk about the final round, let's for all of our listeners, obviously, of course, Christy and Matt will address this in further detail in their upcoming podcast next week. But I think let's answer some very basic questions about where things are sitting right now. And first of all, the first question, Tony, because I know you've been all over this story this morning. In those press conferences, what exactly has been said by Phil and by Dan?
So this private consortium was attempting to put together a bid to take over the license for the Rebels going forward. The private liquidator recently revealed that they've been trading insolvent. Rugby Australia say that they've been open to this, that they've been listening to the consortium. They've sought more details. It's even to the point where Rugby Australia today are saying they don't know the identity of some of the people backing this bid, and they have significant doubts over the consortium's proposed financial model being put forward as well. The press conference, it was quite strongly worded at times, especially from Dan Herbert. He basically said that they wanted this consortium to go out there and blow their minds, but it turns out that they got to a point where they kept asking for information and the information just didn't come to their satisfaction. Look, it's been said and suggested that Rugby Australia always kind of felt that they wanted to move on from this franchise. They did say that there were three options on the table. One was to get rid of the club, one was to allow the private consortium to carry the club on, and the other was for Rugby Australia to step in and fund the club, but that their financial resources were too limited to do that.
It's a massive piece of news, and it's quite considerable in terms of that. Looking back at that press, we actually do have some of the press conference on theraw.com.au if you'd like to check it out yourself and hear directly, as well as a couple of articles that, as you mentioned, Mitch Drummond and, of course, Tony, you yourself have put together. So, key question from that is, what does this mean, not just for the Rebels, but also Rugby Australia, the consortium, Super Rugby Pacific?
Well, the consortium say that they're going to sue. We're expecting that to happen, that they'll launch court action on Monday. The head of that, Lee Clifford, who's a former boss of Qantas, said that Rugby Australia is shrinking the sport. They've abandoned any pretense or a serious national competition. They've cut off the pathways for girls, women, boys, and men to live their dream of playing professional rugby for their local team. And they've also had a bit of a swipe at the Rugby Australia's decision to put millions of dollars in financial support into the Waratahs. So what is about to happen is that the players are flying to Fiji. They'll play a game this weekend. Kevin Foote, the coach, after the meeting with Dan Herbert and Phil Waugh, took the players into a room, addressed them. He made it clear that any players who were too affected to do their jobs this weekend could step down without an issue. Everyone's on board. They're there for the rugby story, apparently. They want to write a story, and they'll be in the finals next week and have plenty of motivation as well. As for the future, Phil Waugh said that discussions are ongoing with the broadcasters and New Zealand Rugby, that they're looking at 11 teams for next season, which means a reduction of games from 91 down to 83 to 85, I think he suggested. But at the moment, that's too early to be definitive on exactly how that looks. The Rugby Australia bosses also said that at the moment, the Rebels Super Women's team is unaffected, that this decision doesn't necessarily cover them today, although they didn't give any guarantees around that. They were just said that was being put down for a later time. There was plenty of talk around the timing with those Rebels players having to head off for a game. They really, Dan Herbert and Phil Waugh both said that there was no good timing on this, that they had hoped that they could have resolved it in a positive manner, but that there was just indications that it would drag on, and that kicking the can down the road would have no positive outcome. When could we release these news was their viewpoint. It did come as a shock to players, though. I think the fact that the timing with the season still live, they weren't really expecting it to be delivered now. Everyone was more expecting it at the end of the season.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very. I think that's the first thing that's kind of stuck out to you and I in the couple of conversations we've had today. Is this seems like a piece of news that would probably be served best if it would happen after the Rebels are no longer in contention, or if they're no longer in contention. Whether they, have a belter of a finals campaign or not, we don't know. But they know that. Yeah,
look, to be fair, and to be fair to Dan Herbert, his quote was, once these decisions are made, generally, it's hard to keep it under wraps, and we know that's the case. And we had committed to the players and the staff that we would share that information with them as soon as we arrived at that decision. If we were to do it next week leading into a final, their first final, I think that would have been worse. So you can kind of understand where he's coming from there.
Mm. So kind of last question before we dive into this. Of course, we will touch on this topic. It's a huge news story. What will happen from here effectively? I know, as you alluded to, the consortium will likely file a legal challenge of some description next week, but what happens next?
Well, Rugby Australia, they seem fairly comfortable with a legal challenge, although Phil Waugh did say that every dollar we spend in court is a dollar that doesn't get invested into the game of rugby around Australia. That sounds like a bit of a wishful thinking that in a bid to stop that. The legal action is coming. That is something that's going to take a lot more time and depth to get into. And I think as we'll see the result of that over the next few weeks, if not days as well. So it's a bit hard to call exactly whether they can salvage it from here. They certainly, if they do so, it would be a bit of a miracle comeback, I think, considering the stance of RA right now. But yes, it looks like 11 teams going forward into 2025, but also then raises questions around what are we doing here. There's a lot of support for a Super Rugby AU or a restructure of the competition. I know you've put a lot of time and thought into that, certainly more than I have. And, on the Raw, there's a big feeling that we should be having a competition that is an Australian competition where we see an Australian grand final winner each year. And maybe this is a move towards it. They also have suggested, and the question was put to them a couple of times before, is there any way back for the Rebels after 2025? They've both said we're not closing the door. Options are open. It's hard to see that right now, but look, the politics in rugby, who could really tell me?
Who can tell indeed? I mean, as you allude to, there is a lot still to play out here. And hey, I think your point about future directions and structures of the game, I can't shut up talking about it. It's always a constant topic of discussion. I do not think we're going to see the end of the Rebels at all. I think there is they will continue forward in some way or another. The fact that they're continuing the women's side for the time being, I think is a very interesting move. So they clearly see there's a great opportunity there, as they should. I mean, a lot of that side has come through the Linroth Cup. They all play a lot of their rugby in Victoria. So one to watch here. And as you alluded to at the start, this is going to hang right over this upcoming weekend of games. And it's not that there wasn't enough to talk about already, because we've got a whole bunch of finals considerations and permutations to examine. All of the dynamics and stuff really come into play. Earlier this week, I dropped an article. Thanks very much for putting your two eyes over it, by the way, Tony, because it was very complicated about what the actual logistics for each particular team look like going into this final round. And we'll kind of give you a small, quick summary per team in this podcast as we go on top of the squad news. But for full details, head over to that article, just because, considering there's spots up for grabs and team logistics as well, it is very complicated to cover it in one podcast.
Yeah, great job on that. I did it the last 2 years, and it's an absolute mind bender. So I was really happy to throw you that considerable hospital pass this year. And, a former podcaster of ours, Brett McKay, thanks to him for picking up the one flaw in your 2,000 words of mathematical genius. So we do appreciate that. For that. So if anyone else has spotted any other mathematical errors in there, it's nick@theraw.com.au.
I love it. Throwing me under the bus. Well, yeah, there has been a couple. I do appreciate Brett for doing that. There has been one or two others, and to all of those people, I do actually appreciate you pulling me up on the small little things. It's very complicated, but let's dive straight into this final round. And of course, the first game coming up is a match between 10th and 11th, Crusaders and Moana Pacifica. Before we dive into squad news, because there is some squad news, both sides are actually still a mathematical chance of making finals, but we're in the side of the ladder where a lot of stuff has to happen. For the Crusaders, of course, both sides need to respectively win this game, but they will also both be banking on Fiji losing to the Melbourne Rebels in Lautoka, as well as the result over in Perth with the Western Force hosting the Brumbies. So both of them need those games to go favourably, i.e. the Brumbies win that and the Rebels win that. So a lot riding on the Australian sides this weekend for these two respective teams, even before they decide their own fate. Tony, what are the squads looking like?
Well, for a start, the bookmakers have this probably as wide a margin as you can imagine. They have the Crusaders paying $1.02 and Moana Pacifica at $23. I think that's a sign that the Crusaders have kind of come okay in the last few weeks, but probably too late. It is a bit ludicrous that the 10th and 11th place teams can play finals on the last weekend of the year, of course, leaving the Waratahs as the only team that can't. The Crusaders have made 3 changes. You've got Ryan Crotty in for the injured David Havili. Sevu Reece misses out. He's replaced by Mako Springer. And Tamati Williams, the All Black, comes in to replace another All Black, Fletcher Newell. Scott Barrett is still out. He hasn't played for some weeks now. Now the Crusaders, Crotty, Joe Moody and Owen Franks, it's being said that it's their final home game of their careers for the Crusaders, with all 3 moving on next season. For Moana Pacifica, friend of the pod, Sukopi Kepu, he starts in what might be his final game, and there's a potential debut for a Samoan prop, Ivan Fepelii. He has come through a Oceania development pathway through to that team, so they're quite excited about seeing him in action this week. How do you kind of see this one? Are you with the play-up bookmakers on this, Nick? Any chance at all for NP?
Well, I mean, MP do actually have one thing in their favour, which is that even though the Crusaders are ahead of them by a point on in terms of actual competition points, they do have 1 victory more than the Crusaders. The Crusaders have only amassed 3 victories this season. So if competition points are equal, it goes over to matches won, where in this case, the Moana Pacifica and the Western Force actually have an advantage over the Crusaders. They both have 4 victories to the Crusaders' 3. So a lot can also play into that factor. In terms of this actual game, though, I mean, Moana has done better this year. It has been, and considering they have outperformed my expectations in terms of where that squad was at the start of the season and the fact that they were starting from basically from scratch. But after that Blues result last week, throw in the fact that I feel like the moment Tamati Williams came on, the Crusaders looked like the side of old. I'm not going to lie. Just his inclusion changed the dynamic of that entire squad. You have to go Crusaders here, wouldn't you, Tony?
I would. I don't think there's any doubt about that at all, and I don't think there's much need to really dwell on a game where, they are 10th and 11th. They are a mathematical chance, but we're not really expecting it to fall that way, are we? But the next one has even less riding on it, but yes, not if you're an Australian rugby fan, right?
No, exactly. It's the Waratahs and the Reds, and it is in fact the only game this round that is a legitimate dead rubber. If this game doesn't happen, or even nothing changes in terms of the context of this season, the Reds currently are locked into 5th. There is no way that they can actually go up or down. The Highlanders cannot catch them. They cannot catch the Chiefs in terms of competition points. So 5th is locked in. They are guaranteed to head over to Waikato next week, coming up against a Waratahs side that is 12 points behind Moana Pacifica. They are sitting at the bottom of the ladder. There is no way they can get off the bottom of the ladder, and they will finish with the wooden spoon. I'm not going to lie, though, Tony. There is one inclusion in that Waratahs side that has drawn a huge surprise.
Paddy Ryan is back, and yes. I'm going to say, that's a blast from the past, but you got to think Matt Dunning might have been sitting there worried that he was going to get the next call. So, in a way, it's probably lucky for Matt and a few other old props banging around that the season does end for the Waratahs this week. Paddy Ryan, I spoke to him a few years ago for Athlete's Voice for a feature, and a lovely bloke playing in Japan in a small town. This was kind of never going to be on his radar, but good on him for, aiming up, as the kiddies say, and coming out there and, he's putting a bit on the line there. It's not like he's, strolling out on the wing, is it? They've been outplayed. They've been outpowered up front. He's up against a couple of wallabies, or a wallaby and a wallaby hopeful in the Reds front row. Les Kiss had plenty of options this week, as he spoke about on the Stam coverage after that 5th place was pretty much locked up. So he could have gone into this and really rested a lot of guys. Interesting to see. He's paid a lot of respect, I think, to the Tars. There are some changes. Lawson Crichton comes into 10. Tom Liner moving to the bench. Zane Nongor comes in over Jeffrey Tamuga Allen into the front row. The most interesting story for the Reds, though, is a first start for 22-year-old number 8 Joe Bryle. His dad, Michael, was a New South Wales captain and Wallaby. Joe himself played for the New Zealand under-20s last year, so he's got a little bit. He could go either way at the moment on that, which is interesting because Michael is probably most famous for bashing the heck out of Frank Bunce back in '96 in Brisbane. I think probably long before you were born, Nick. But it was after Bunce had injured him in '92 in a Test match, and that is if you're out there, and I guess most of our listeners will be aware that this is on YouTube and it is a fantastic way to spend a few minutes. But Michael and 20 other family members are going to be there in Sydney to cheer young Joe on. For the Waratahs, we spoke about Paddy Ryan. Ned Hannigan is out, which means that's his final game played for the Waratahs, at least in this iteration, his second go with the Waratahs before he heads over to Europe. Lockie Swinton and Tom Ross are back. And there's a surprise, I guess, at number 10. Tane Edmed has been benched. Jack Bowen gets the first shot at number 10 there. No sign of Will Harrison. The Bob Templeton Cup, regardless of what it means for the Super Rugby season, and as you pointed out, it means nothing at all for the final table. It's still the one that I grew up on, the maroon shirt versus the blue shirt. It was kind of the only gig in town when I was at school. So as a Brumbies fan, mate, does this one excite you, or is it just a little bit of ho-hum?
No, it excites me. Every Australian derby excites me, and no, not just for the Bob Templeton Cup. I mean, you always have to get excited for a New South Wales versus Queensland derby, even if you haven't got a foot in either camp. And that actually, to be honest, I prefer those games, Tony. I prefer being completely neutral and just enjoying the rugby that's in front of me. I'm not surprised at all that Kiss is going with a pretty strong side. I think we're at the stage of the season where he's probably really going to target that Chiefs match. They have to pull off a big win there to get into semi-finals. And so I think locking down at the squad as best you can and giving them as much game time together is crucial for the Reds. So I'm not surprised that he's going full strength and, probably hoping to really just maintain that momentum. And I think the decision to put Liner on the bench is probably the only rest that he's getting because, I mean, how many games has Liner played this season? And again, done very, very well. Bowen's a strange choice over Ed Med. I'm not going to lie. I know Christie has been talking a lot about, seeing as the Tane is still very much, we're still not quite sure exactly where he's going to go or not. So why wouldn't you have him as your selected fly half alongside Jake Gordon? But I think it's still good to see the likes of Miles Amatosero and Swinton play. I think Swinton has been phenomenal this season. I think it's his best season in Sky Blue. Not just that aggression and that physicality that he has, but controlled, focused. He hasn't lost his head as much as previous seasons, and it has transformed him into one of the most valuable players in that side. Scott Fardy-esque is the way I like to describe it. Very much so. But
so he should be great. So you're telling me he's going to be great for the Waratahs next year? Oh, no, you're not telling me that.
I'm going to say, oh, no, he's gone. But I will say, as much as you'd hope that the Waratahs can finish the season off on a high, I think considering momentum and strength, I'd have to go Reds. You'd have to go Reds, wouldn't you?
Yes, although they will have one eye on it, won't they? And it'll be interesting to see game state, a couple of guys bowing out for the Waratahs, and then, do they back off a bit, the Reds? I think that, if there's but again, because of that old rivalry, you can't see it happening. I definitely will be tipping the Reds, but, I decided a few weeks back that I'd never tip for the Waratahs again, so... Just sticking to that, mate. Just sticking to that. There is a game. So the first game on Saturday, that one does have a little bit at stake, at least for the home side, correct?
A little bit. It's probably one of the games that everyone is going to be keeping their eyes on, especially if you are at the bottom of the ladder trying to get in. Of course, we are talking about the Fijian Drua versus the Melbourne Rebels in Lautoka, which is a very exciting match. I think, in all honesty, this is probably the most important game in terms of the context of the season. That might, in terms of the bottom of the ladder, definitely there is a lot more contentious games also coming up that we'll talk about momentarily. But essentially, if the Drua win, they cut off 9th to 11th in terms of their chances of making finals. They're 2 points clear of this team in 9th, the Western Force. The Rebels, meanwhile, they are guaranteed a finals finish. They will make their maiden finals berth in 2024, which is, considering the fact that they've dealt with a lot of stuff going on around them, is a remarkable achievement. But if they actually win this game and the Highlanders lose against the Hurricanes, they could jump above them to 6th, which means they could, unless the ladder higher above changes, be on a trip to Canberra. But looking at these squads, there are 2 particular names that stand out in that Rebels squad to me, and they're quite similar.
Well, Carter Gordon's back, and he will play for the first time alongside, in a starting lineup at least, alongside his brother Mason. I'm not sure if they're the 2 that you're talking about. Mason Gordon comes in at number 15. He's had a few replacement appearances. What it means is that Andrew Kellaway, who was pretty much outplayed by Tom Wright last week in the Brumbies' significant win over the Rebels, he's moving to the wing where, a few of us would like to see him play for the Wallabies, assuming Tom Wright has that position kind of locked down. I know I put that in my power rankings recently, and there are quite a few people who still see Kellaway as the number 15 choice. I don't know what Tom Wright's got to do to sway them. Maybe actually perform at Wallabies level might be a great start for that. There's a 100th game for Taniela Tupou, who, to be honest, a lot of people think is probably very lucky to be out there after he was cited and then cleared for his clean out of Darcy Swain last week. Back with the Drua, you have Frank Lamani, the test halfback. Now, he's back after a 6-week suspension. I'm not sure if you remember this. I'm sure you do. He caught that suspension against the Rebels. And we all know what happened there, where he turned poor Josh Canham into a bloody mess. Pictures of Josh wandering around, taking photos with fans afterwards with his bloodied head dressing. Imagine, even without the finals thing on the line, there should be a bit of feeling, because there were a couple of moments where the Fijians in that game absolutely lost the plot. They will be fired up with finals on the line at home, in front of that crowd, in that heat. This, you talk about it being an exciting game of rugby. It could be a brutal battle as well, Nick.
Yeah, add to that, rain is forecast as well for this particular game.
That.
But I know for a fact, I watch the social medias on the Raw. I see all of you people talking out there. I see you all, and I know for a fact that all of the Fijian fans who follow our channels are saying we're going to see you in round 15 after that particular clash. So I know that there will be spite, there will be fury. I expect there to be a couple of biff sessions, and I'll tell you what, it'll be a hostile environment in Lautoka where Melbourne go, and realistically speaking, or realistically, potentially, could be their last regular season game, and possibly the penultimate game ever in the history of their entire team. So, a lot to look at. I feel like it's going to be a fascinating clash. Tony, are you going to go with the home side given their previous record? I think the home side, you have to back them, but we've seen a few. We saw earlier in the season when the Waratahs should have beaten them, Tane Edmed, with a drop goal that whacked into the upright, and they took it up to them that day. The Reds, interestingly, unlike what they've done this week, they kind of backed off on selection when they went up there. Les Kiss talked about that last week as well, about how they had a 2-game plan that no team ever comes back from a trip to Fiji and then wins, which he then went and did. So I think they strategically backed off. Of course, the Rebels can't, shouldn't be strategically backing off, although, look at it, the finals are kind of locked in. Is it kind of better to keep your powder dry there, although that's probably impossible if it's a Fijian monsoon. It is intriguing. To me, this, as you stated up top, probably the game of the round. And it's a midday Australia kickoff. I always like those. It's a good time to get your Saturday off to a start. Back into another match that will have decent bearing on the top 3 at least, and that's the Hurricanes second against the Highlanders in 6, 2:35 Saturday. Exactly. It's I think these are the games that I'm going to keep a watch on, which is particularly exciting given, as you allude to, there is actually currently with the Blues ahead, they are ahead only on points differential, but all top 3 sides being the Blues, the Canes, and the Brumbies, are all equal in terms of victories. So they all have 11 victories and 2 losses. So there is, in the event that one side drops or 2 sides drop, another side can sneak in on top and take first place. So there is very much a battle for first place going on here. The Hurricanes, I think this is going to be a fascinating clash. The Highlanders they can't finish any higher than 6th at the moment. They look very much like a side that they're guaranteed to finish there. They could potentially drop down to 7th, pending what happens in Fiji and if they lose this particular match here. But I reckon that they'll look at this game with a lot of opportunity. I think the Canes, though, a very big name is back. One probably the top 3 players of the season for me, Tony, and he's starting at number 2 for the Hurricanes.
Safo Omua is back, and it's a good thing too, because their previous hooker Patrick Tapu suffered a 3-week ban on the weekend for his high hit. So it's a good thing that the Hurricanes have got that rather excellent first choice coming back into their team. They're still missing Brad Shields and Tyrell Lomax, so there's still quite a bit of quality to come back for them. The push, the interesting thing here for me is the Highlanders have kind of backed off in selection. They've made quite a few changes. It's almost an acceptance of fate, and you've kind of seen it a bit with the Chiefs in the next game as well, that the Brumbies need losses here and a win of their own to maybe come first and see this through. But the way that the team lineups look, you're not really seeing it. Now, the other aspect to this is, as you said, the Blues have a better points differential. The interesting thing here will be for the Hurricanes to try and put the bonus point on, and then the pressure is right in on that next game that follows up at, straight after that as well. I mean, do you see any other scenario here? For me, it's a Hurricanes victory pretty comfortably and pushing the bonus point.
Yeah, I say Hurricanes take the minor premiership with a win here on the weekend. So I think,
right.
I think even though the Blues are ahead on points differential and they're equal on competition points, it comes down to that bonus point right now. And I think we have a situation where the truth of the matter is, even though the Highlanders are an improved side, I don't think they're quite at the same level as, say, the Chiefs right now. And I think the Chiefs, even though they've picked a slightly weaker side, are going to offer a lot more opposition for that Blues side, despite the fact that the Blues are at home. I have question marks over whether the Blues can put a bonus point on the Chiefs. I don't have I think it is very likely that the Hurricanes will put a bonus point on this Highlanders side. So I think that the Hurricanes will win with a bonus point and will take the minor premiership off the Blues in the final round. I think that leads us very nicely on to that Blues-Chiefs game, 1v4 for the Chiefs. Similar to the Reds, nothing can change. They can go equal with the Brumbies if they win somehow against all the odds, win here in Auckland with a bonus point. But regardless, because of the win-loss ratio, the Brumbies have 2 more wins than the Chiefs, so it makes no difference in terms of they will still not be able to go above them. The Blues, meanwhile, I think will hopefully be looking to try and get a bonus point win. If they can pull off a bonus point win in this match, the Blues will finish as minor premiers for the season. Simple reality, no one else will be able to catch them. Yeah,
so the Blues have Finlay Christie coming back off the bench after a bit of an injury issue. Caleb Clark and Dalton Papali'i are also back, having been rested a week ago. The Chiefs are stronger than many expected. As you said, it's locked in for a match against Queensland. They could have rested. Interesting to see D-Mac there at number 10 as well, not in cotton wool, where I'm sure many Chiefs fans would like to see him luxuriating this weekend. There's a welcome return, though, for Samipeni Finau, the flanker, who's come back after, I think, around 6 weeks with a shoulder injury. And Wallace Satiti starts at 8 in an interesting selection. I think you've covered off the predictions pretty well there, which really sends us to the last game, which could be a belter with everything on the line, or might just be a they're going to know what they're all going to know where they're heading anyway. It's all going to be locked in by the time the Brumbies trot out against the Force. So that's over in Perth at 7:35 on Saturday night.
Exactly. It's a big. Well, I do think for the Force there is still plenty to play for here. They'll have to if it is the case that the Crusaders beat Moana Pacifica, but not with a bonus point, there is a chance, and of course Fiji lose. There is a chance that the Force can actually sneak in here with a win. Ideally, if it is a bonus point, if the Crusaders do end up with a bonus point, the Force will need a bonus point by extension. They could, and they'll leap over the Crusaders into 8th and also Fiji based on the number of wins achieved. But I will say the Brumbies, even though they are would be tempting fate, hopefully will be trying to aim for a first place if it is the case that those 2 results in New Zealand don't go their way. There's still plenty of momentum that can be gained from a victory in the West. And unlike last year, it is important to mention, which I think that loss in WA last year really threw their season off considerably. They're going over there with a very strong squad, Tony.
Yes, but I think if you look at it, I think out of the 2 scenarios playing out that it's live for both teams, I think the Force being a chance seems to me like a more realistic scenario. That I don't think the Brumbies, I can't see the Brumbies improving from 3rd. And I think to make any prediction before you know what the situation is before kickoff, it's going to be fairly fraught, because if the Force with a win can make the finals and the Brumbies are going to be 3rd anyway, then that intensity is going to be at completely different levels, you'd imagine. But the Force, who do, of course, need results to go their way elsewhere, they've got the big loss of Ben Donaldson. He has got a groin injury and he is out, but they do welcome back former Wallabies lock Sam Carter, maybe future Wallabies lock Sam Carter. The Brumbies are missing James Slipper. He has torn a calf muscle, and they were talking about it being a grade 1 tear, a 2 to 4 week situation. I mean, Slips might not be back this season. He's an old bloke. He's, it's playing in a position where aggravating a calf seems like an occupational hazard most weeks. But they are fortunate enough to have Blake Shop coming back after a long absence of his own with a shoulder injury. And Harry Vella's back in there as well. Interesting change there with Nick Frost, who's been playing on the side of the scrum, going back into lock alongside Darcy Swain. Tom Hooper is coming back out to flanker.
I can see what they're doing there. I think probably they've identified that Rodder has been playing reasonably well for the Force and been doing a lot of good stuff with their line out. So if they can try to neutralise that by putting Frost in there, I think it's going to make a big impact for this game. I mean, there's the WA banana skin. It's no joke for any particular reason at all. I think the fact that they've won close to 80% of their last couple of 12 or 13 games at home says a lot about the Western Force. But for some reason, and I don't want to say this purely as a one-eyed Brumbies fan, I'm going Brumbies.
Yeah, I will have to give a tip. The tip will be the Brumbies, but I would, in a perfect world, I'd be tipping as they're running out on the field, because if the Brumbies final scenario can't change, but the Forces can, I think that makes a power of difference. If the Brumbies are live for 1st or 2nd place at that point, then the Force are going to get swept aside. I just think that game state and intensity must play a big role. I think, Nick, during that exercise that you went through this week of all the permutations and scenarios, I'm pretty sure at the end of it you came up with the quarterfinal predictions. I reckon maybe to send the punters off happy today, you might give us your rundown of what you think that quarterfinal week looks like.
Indeed. I think I completely agree, Tony. It's a good place to finish off. I think as a result of this weekend, next weekend, we will see the Hurricanes hosting the Drua. It'll be 1st v 8th down at the Cake Tin. We will then see the Auckland Blues play against the Melbourne Rebels in the Rebels' first ever and maybe last ever quarterfinal appearance. I know. Then, of course, we head over to Canberra to see the Brumbies take on the Highlanders, which will be a very good clash out in the nation's capital. And then finishing off, they're all international flares. Of course, the game that we know is locked in, it cannot change. I know with this one, I'll at least be right. It'll be the Chiefs playing the Reds in Waikato. It's going to be a fascinating bunch of games and a great way to close off what's been quite occasionally very unpredictable season of Super Rugby Pacific. It's been very fascinating. Also important to note, additionally, that there has also been announced some fixtures for the upcoming Under-20s World Championships. The Junior Wallabies will be coming up against the likes of Ireland, Georgia, and Italy in Pool B. Of course, everyone knows Ireland has been probably one of the informed sides in the under-20s competition, winning the Six Nations in 2022 and 2023 and finishing as runners-up, and actually were unbeaten. It was one bonus point that came right down to it. So a lot to look at there when that campaign kicks off in July. But for all of our listeners, thank you so much. Christy Doran and Matt Tamua will be back with the regular pairing of the Raw Rugby podcast.
Yeah, well, thanks, Nick. I mean, I've loved our debut pod together. I just one question for you: are you Carter or are you Mason?
Oh, I definitely am Mason. I can't pull the hair off like that.
I'll catch you soon, man. Enjoy the weekend.